All right, beautiful. Let me actually pick this thing up here because it gets a little grumpy if it's too far away from my face. And my boom arm broke, so I gotta actually hold this thing by hand now. Uh, but happy? Oh, I know, I know. Happy Friday, Aaron. Thank you so much for jumping in. The nutrition podcast series have done really well so far. People are loving it. And so, I thought that, give me 1 second here. I'm just going to bump this down a little. I thought that it could be a really good idea today to talk about making adjustments to a nutrition plan. Because, we've talked about proteins, we've talked about fats, we've talked about carbs, we talked about how lean is too lean and things of that nature. But I think a common question that everyone's going to run into at some point in time, if you're trying to, lose weight or gain weight, is what do I do when things stop working, right? Because inevitably at some point in time on a weight loss or a weight gain journey, you're going to get on the flat part of the curve, law of diminishing returns, and you're not going to be seeing that progress anymore, right? And it's the ability to make those adjustments when things stop working that are going to allow yourself to be successful in kind of like your long-term goals and what you're looking to achieve. And so wanted to chat today about making those adjustments, what to do when things stop working. And so maybe I think the best first place to start, and we've talked about this previously on another podcast, but we need to bring it here for relevancy purposes, is you have to have data first and foremost to be able to actually make this decision. So I think let's start there, just because without that, none of this conversation is going to matter.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is a tricky part if we feel plateaued or stuck or we don't know why things aren't working. But to your point, absolutely. If we were to kind of think of this as an algorithm, the first place to begin might definitely be to first assess, well, what was my goal? And I actually want to emphasize that because a lot of times with nutrition and fitness, the goals are in a style that I call moving goalposts, which is kind of always, I wish I was a little leaner. I wish I had a little more muscle. But then that goalpost is really moving around. I'm going to eat more protein. Maybe I should focus on cutting my carbs. Maybe I should drink less. Let me try to lift a little more. But now I'm running a lot. And so first I would say, do you have a specific goal that you could explain to me? And that's why I often ask my clients first, if we look at you 6 months from now, what does your life look like? What does your day look like? How will we know you even hit that goal? And that makes people have to articulate their goal. So I try to give people's brain a stage to actually say that out loud for the first time, which is often the first time. And it might take a few times to kind of make that a little bit of a higher resolution image for ourselves. So I would first assess that and get really clear on what is it that you really want to achieve, and are you certain you are not there? And that would definitely require data. So if we were to say, I wanted body composition changes, or I wanted more strength, or whatever it might be, I wanted to feel more peaceful with my food, we should first set out on that goal with a vision of what that would look like. Then we would need to have the data of, has any of my lifts increased in weight, or is my deadlift literally the same? Is my body weight literally the same? And whatever it might be, am I stress eating every Thursday night? So first, having the clarity, and then second, checking in with data. Without the clarity, there will be no data, which would clue you in that the goal may not have been clear enough. If we were to say, I just feel stuck, and if I were to sit down with you and say, well, why? If we would say, I don't know, I just don't feel good, then we may not have actually set a clear goal. So that would be the first thing to handle.
Very important for people to keep in mind here, because without a clear goal, like a SMART goal, right? It's specific, it's measurable, realistic, and all these different factors, it's hard to really start, because if you get 6 to 8 weeks into a training or nutrition plan, how can you tell if you're being successful if you haven't set that goal originally? And I've seen this before where, people come in and tell me, yeah, man, my goal is to lose like 10 pounds, whatever it is, or I want to put on muscle. Actually, I had this conversation with a client literally this past week, because he came in and was like, yeah, man, I really want to, build muscle and get stronger. And we were chatting. He's like, man, I still don't know if this is going really well. I'm like, okay, let's assess where we're at. I'm like, you have been here for 3 months, coming up on 4 months. And your goal coming in, you're like 190, 195 pounds. And you're like, man, I really want to put on some weight and mass and get stronger. I'm like, you are currently almost 210 pounds. Like, That is literally the specific goal that you set. And that's exactly where you are. Oh man, yeah, I don't know. I just like, and so we just had to kind of talk him through that and be like, you are at your goal. Like, this is exactly what you wanted to do. We've put on 10 to 15 pounds of like really quality mass because we have check-in photos and we're looking at all these things, and like, you objectively look leaner and you look more muscular. But I think the moving goalpost thing is the interesting concept, because once people get into things, this is why goals are tricky. Once they tend to get near the goalpost moves. It's like they're starting to summit the first mountain, and then they see the next one, and then they just kind of totally forget the first one that they went over, and they're like, now focus on this thing over here. And it's like, okay, well, we got to pause and reflect on, okay, like, what was the goal? What did you say would make you really happy? Awesome. Now that we're here, now let's talk about what the next goal may be for you, right? But I think it's really easy to just like blow past those because goals just continually move away from you as you get near them. And this gets into a whole other realm that we won't talk about today, but this is where I think, identity becomes incredibly important, systems and habits, because you want to become the type of person that does this thing. You don't necessarily want to just reach this goal, because by the time you get to the goal, the goalpost is moved, right? But I do think that this is a very important pre-frame for talking about what to do when things aren't actually working.
Definitely. And that's a perfect example of the goal was definitely properly set. If you can sit down with that client and look at literally numeric data and help the client see that they've actually done a fabulous job. And sometimes that's a really important part of coaching too. A lot of people will struggle to maybe set the goal. We can help them with that. Then again, a lot of people maybe set the goal and would struggle to celebrate themselves. We can help them with that. And it is so true. We always might kind of push something off into the distance and not realize how far we've come, especially with things that might feel small, like behaviors or consistency. And some of that stuff sometimes feels a little boring, but it's extraordinarily effective. So it's worth it to slow down a little bit.
Absolutely.
There and appreciate that.
Okay,
sure.
So let's put ourselves in the shoes of the individual. Maybe we'll start with weight loss first, and then we'll talk about weight gain second. Let's start off with the weight loss client, right? So they're into this journey. They've been making progress. The scale is moving down, and then inevitably we're probably going to hit a point where the scale stops going down. And that's usually where people have their first big hurdle. This is the first big test. And I think a lot of folks hit this and they're like, well, this has been working. Why is it not working for me anymore? Then they get frustrated, they get annoyed, and then they just give up on it and they stop. And then they just kind of like go right back to where they were previously. So for weight loss clients, and there's obviously, these conversations are hard because there's so much nuance on a individual by individual basis. So we're going to have to talk probably, in broader strokes than I think either of us are really comfortable with, but hopefully we can at least hit on some things that will help the vast majority of you out there. And so when you see the scale stop moving for, say, a weight loss client, and you start thinking about making adjustments, where are like the first kind of like big rocks and nuggets that your brain goes to of, these are levers that we can play with to then reanalyze, like, I make this change. Did we make progress? No, cool. Maybe we tweak this. Just kind of, what are the thought processes there for you?
Definitely. So in that same vein of thinking of a way to follow an algorithm to assess these moments, my first branch in this algorithm would be to say, have I plateaued behaviorally or have I plateaued numerically somewhere? So what I mean by that is if I have a weight loss plateau, I might think, is my math wrong? Are my calories wrong? Do I need to move more? There's actually a lot of numeric things to look at there. But it's not unusual, and there's nothing wrong with also having a behavioral plateau. So what I often see, I'll look at each one. So what I often see with a behavioral plateau is something like someone had say swapped an afternoon snack habit and then was meal prepping lunches or something like that. And then something crept in over a couple of weeks. I just was talking to a client this week about work got really crazy. So she was missing lunch every day and then grazing all afternoon. But she was so busy at work, and she's in charge of a team at this like engineering company. She was so busy, she didn't even really realize that she was snacking on these things and hadn't meal prepped, and she was sleeping poorly. And it wasn't out of the realm of her norm to actually get that stress. So her brain was kind of like, yeah, I don't know, this is just life. Aren't I kind of always like this? And she didn't realize that her meal prep had shifted and the snacking had increased, and she didn't have what she needed when she was at work. So she didn't do anything wrong, but there was this really, really slow behavioral shift that brought her calories up a smidge and just were enough to bring her back up into energy maintenance. So therefore, there's a weight loss plateau because she's not out of a deficit. She's not in a deficit anymore. And truthfully, that can be rather small. So you might not be doing anything crazy behaviorally, but there's just enough to pull you back up into energy maintenance. And that's really common. So we might want to assess behaviors. What changed in my routine or my sleep or my movement or my cooking? Did I eat out a few more times this week? Things like that can be really sneaky. And it's not that someone failed, but it's something to address because we wouldn't want to change the math if we need to address a behavior. So then on the flip side would be if someone's has been sticking to the exact same calories, all the behaviors have stayed the same, and they hit a weight loss plateau, we might be looking at needing to tweak macros, reduce calories a smidge, or increase movement. And sometimes we hit weight loss plateaus where it's not appropriate to continue decreasing calories. So we need to do things like, how many steps per day am I getting? Am I training consistently? Maybe I could train one more day per week. Maybe I could walk a little bit more. And we don't want to tweak math or reduce calories or increase movement if there's actually a behavioral issue, because now I'm just taking more food away or making someone move more when I actually just needed to help them meal prep a little bit or snack a little differently. So that's the first big branch point in that algorithm.
I love that.
For me,
Yeah, you have to look at the behaviors first, because if you just start tweaking numbers without addressing the behaviors, then it's kind of like you're trying to. I'm trying to think of a good analogy for this, right? Like your boat's taking on water and you're just like going around with like spackling and kind of like covering up the holes as they pop up, but it's not a very good solution. Like it's just gonna keep leaking again at some point in time, right? Kind of similar to the whole idea of, I'm walking around with a rock in my shoe and my foot hurts, and so I'll take Advil as opposed to maybe just going in and taking the rock out of my shoe. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like where my head goes with that. And so if the behaviors haven't changed and we start looking more at the numbers, I think the two things that were important there is we said, okay, we can really approach this in one of two ways. We can either look at, dropping calories in some way, tweaking macros and calories, or we can look at increasing your output and movement, which is one that's not really discussed very much at all. But, let's say that this is a person who is like really active. They're already hitting their 10,000 steps a day and they're working out, 3, 4, 5 times a week consistently. When you go to think about adjusting calories, do you look at, adjusting carbs first? Do we pull fats down first? Do we just drop, total calories, but keep the percentages of proteins, fats, and carbs the same? What's kind of the first way that you like to approach doing that?
Good question. So what I first look at that is I might think about, and I'll talk about with a client, what in their day is really valuable. So for example, if I do indeed need to trim calories somehow, because there's a math issue going on. If we're at a true weight loss plateau and they're moving a lot, that means I must reduce calories, because the macros are kind of a fancy way to break down the calories, but really ultimately it's going to be the calories that matter the most, just because of the laws of thermogenetics. So I definitely have to trim those calories. But where I really focus on is more so how to trim a little bit of calories, because I personally really like to keep people well fed, and I really like people to eat as much as possible. So if we have high value nutritious calories at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, there's a really good, post-workout snack, but someone is munching on chocolate covered almonds after dinner, I might say, we got to go after something like that before I make your meals smaller. Those meals are such valuable calories with all that beautiful nutrition in it. I don't want to trim post-workout nutrition. I don't want to trim meals where there's like low targets that we kind of don't care about if we move that down. Or there might be something like fat is a little high at breakfast. We can trim that a little bit because I wouldn't even notice the difference in my taste or my satisfaction. So I would try to go after kind of less meaningful calories first and preserve the volume and the quality of the nutrition at meals. So I'm trimming desserts, added fats, snacks, things like that, maybe eating out a little bit less. So I'd go after that first, but nonetheless, I'm ultimately reducing calories.
Excellent.
Primarily.
And I think that the goal here is not to restrict, because I think what you mentioned here is the goal is actually to have you eating as much delicious, nutritious food as humanly possible. We want to come at this from a mindset of abundance and not limitation and restriction, because limitation and restriction just frankly does not work long term. It's great to get you like really fast results, but last time I checked, nobody's going to live that way for the entirety of their life. It sucks. And so we need to come at it from an abundance model, like how do we get you eating more? Right? Like, how can I have you eating as much really good, rich, nutritious food as possible? And so I think the idea of starting with the low-hanging fruit of like, pull out dessert here, maybe we pull out the glass of wine, maybe we pull out the beer, maybe we pull out this or that. So we can kind of stay focused on like what the core of your nutrition should be anyways is fantastic. And then obviously the biggest place that people don't look a lot of times is just their movement, right? I think that the motto here is we want to move more, do more, eat more. That's kind of the goal at the end of the day, right? Like, let's keep moving more. Let's keep doing more so we can eat more food and be like super happy and well fueled for life. And so obviously low hanging fruit on the output side, if you're not getting 10,000 steps a day, just start. Like, anybody can do that. It's incredibly easy. If you got to set an alarm 30 minutes earlier, get up 30 minutes earlier and go on a walk in the morning. Like, it is 8:30 here on the Eastern Coast time and I'm at 6,000 steps, right? Anyone can do it. Just go on a few walks throughout the day and you'll get there, right? Add a workout in once a week. Like if you're training 2 to 3 days a week, add in a fourth, right? The goal is to really up that output. And like that workout may just be, maybe I'm going to go to the rock climbing gym today, right? I'll go climb for 30 to 45 minutes. It doesn't have to be going to the gym and like doing a traditional workout. It just has to be something where we're increasing your output, your energy output in one way or another. Maybe it's like, oh, I'll join an intramural league and I'm going to go play pickup soccer or flag football or this like one day a week. Awesome. We're increasing output. So there's so many opportunities and low-hanging fruit there to increase output. So we can come at this from an abundance model and not a restrictive model. Okay. Beautiful. I think that's fantastic. Yeah. Let's transition and talk to more of our the meatheads in the crowd who are very near and dear to my heart, who are looking to get bigger, put on muscle, and, bulk up. Because those are the folks that it's a different conversation, right? The likelihood that you're not doing enough in training is probably not it. Like, let's assume the training is there for you and we don't have training-based problems of like you're just not doing good workouts that are actually built to stress you physiologically to get the adaptation you want to build muscle. Let's assume like the training and workouts are there. Like we have a good hypertrophy plan in place. That's on board. The thing that's missing for you on the nutrition side is like you're just not there from like a mass standpoint again. How do you like to approach it when we're looking at weight gain, muscle gain, and things in that realm?
Yeah, definitely. So with these athletes, the first little bucket of issues I would bring up is that a lot of athletes who want to gain muscle also want to trim fat at the same time. And if an athlete's really plateauing in their strength, there might be a choice point of having to say, can I just let the fat loss go for a little while and focus on having a serious calorie surplus so that I can really put this muscle on? Because a lot of people are trying to do both at the same time. And I would say the more trained you are, the harder that's going to be. If you're really untrained and you're coming into fitness, you can put on muscle while trimming some fat. You also can do it if you're a trained athlete and you have a training history. To a degree, you can do that. Are gains maximized when you're also trying to maximize fat loss? No. You can kind of like minimally chip away at gaining some muscle while you're in a calorie deficit, but eventually that will bottom out. And so I would first urge athletes, if they're in that bucket, to not be afraid of weight gain. and get into a calorie surplus, you might be shocked at how happy you feel, how much more energy you have, how well you're sleeping, and you might start to really see those gains. And just let yourself gain some weight. And if you do that well, you're not going to put on loads of fat tissue. A little fat tissue often comes in a mass gaining phase with the muscle, but it's not something to fear as much as I think it often is feared with well-trained people. So I'd first look at that. And then the second thing would be if you are in a calorie surplus and you're training very effectively, the macro breakdown is the next thing that I see sometimes as a little bit of a tricky spot, where an athlete might have a very high fat diet and they're struggling to hit a protein goal, or they're struggling to hit like 400, 500 grams of carbs, and they're really having a lot of fat because they just prefer the taste. So we might need to alter the composition of the food, which
for sure. I know a handful of
too.
people who, and fat is delicious. I 100% get it. I understand. But when we're talking about building muscle, we gotta you gotta hit your protein goals. Like the protein target has to get hit, and then we gotta eat some carbs. Like, I'm sorry, muscle building is in the world of carbohydrates. They've got to be there. So if they're not getting the results and the scale and things are not moving from a muscle building standpoint, right? Obviously, we want to take a look at. Are we hitting our protein target? Are you actually getting in carbs? Or are you just eating a fat bomb every single day and these other two really key metrics are just not actually where they need to be?
Mm-hmm. It's really easy to train a lot, especially if we're not afraid of the calorie surplus, and then really enjoy some guac and chips. And I'm not going to argue with that. Believe me, it's totally delicious. But we actually might have to add things in, like a huge bowl of rice with chicken on top, and honestly, salt and pepper. So sometimes we have to do that too. Or the other thing I would say is sometimes this is a little bit of a misnomer, but sometimes athletes are struggling to hit their carbohydrate and protein goals because they're eating such whole foods. So they're eating like fiber and sweet potato and all these great things, and they're so full. And I will say that this is actually another kind of archetype of a client that we see a lot. A lot of athletes are the type of body type who struggle to put on weight in the first place. They're just kind of like leaner people. There's kind of a whole archetype there that's really interesting. And actually a big study just came out on this, which was really interesting, which was oftentimes we hear about people will say, oh, he's so lean, he can eat whatever he wants and never gains weight. And we always think that these people are eating everything, quote, but not gaining weight. And that's actually just not true. A large study just came out looking at people with a low BMI and low body fat percentage, and they eat less than everybody else. They just eat. This phenotype of people who eat more than they burn but never gain weight does not exist. We've never found one of these people.
This is literally a foundational law of mass and conservation. But yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah, you see it all the time. Exactly. Oh my God. They're like, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that makes me so happy. That answer is like, shocker.
Yep. It's funny. It's just not true. It's just not true. And I always smile because my athletes who are in that bucket, I kind of laugh because sometimes I tease them that they're drama queens, but they're so sensitive to fullness. They have really, really high hunger tolerance. They're the type of person who's like, oh, whoops, I forgot lunch. They just don't eat. Like they're just like that. And they're always so full when they have an increase in calories. And I totally get it. But actually getting them to eat enough is an actual challenge. And this study found that people with low BMI just eat 12% less almost across the board every single day than people with a normal BMI. They don't think about food. They have low food preoccupation. They're really sensitive to fullness cues. They miss meals. They have high hunger tolerance. So athletes in that bucket actually might need more processed food because they're getting so full. They don't even have a lot of hunger. So we might have to shift out of broccoli and fish and things like that and sometimes give them a meal that is some refined grains and more white carbohydrates and some protein powders. We might have to use jams and jellies and more fruit juice and things like that.
Yeah, I'm definitely a great example of someone that falls into that bucket. Like if I'm in a bulking or weight gain phase, which I have not done in a long time, just frankly, I hate doing it. Yeah, like I'm very much like that. Like I can have a tendency just to get doing something. It's like, it's 3:30. I didn't eat lunch today. All right. And yeah, it's like at the end of the day, you can only get so many calories in from like really just whole food, like chicken and broccoli and potatoes. It's just like the food volume at a certain point just gets to be totally outrageous. And we've got to have some tricks and things that we can rely on. And yeah, I love the jellies, the fruit juices. I have recently become a very large fan of some like the instant oatmeals, like the maple and brown sugar instant oatmeal. 2 packs of that's like 60 something grams of carbs. It goes down in about 30 seconds. It's delicious, and it is not filling in the least. Some of the white carbs, right?
Yeah.
You can just do some bread. There's a lot to be said for just peanut butter and jelly on 2 slices of bread to get in some really easy low-hanging fruit calories for folks. But yeah, I definitely honey. Yep. Yes. Honey, yeah, I'm definitely in that camp, and I think a lot of athletes probably are, because they just don't realize the volume of food that they need to be consuming in order to actually build lean mass. And so, yeah, I think if we were going to maybe pull back on this one and summarize a little bit, in the weight gain world, thing number one is we need to appreciate the fact that, really leaning out and burning fat while also simultaneously trying to build muscle is probably not going to work unless you're a total newbie beginner, at which point in time that will be fine. If you have any experience at all, doing both of those things simultaneously is going to be really difficult, and you're going to be tremendously successful at not making much progress in either direction, right? You're probably better off just hunkering down and saying, okay, I want to focus on bulking up and putting on some mass right now. And then we're going to look at the calories. You got to make sure the protein is high, gram per pound. You got to make sure the carbs are high. That one's a little bit more difficult to give you a set number on, right? But you've got to prioritize getting in your proteins and carbs. And you got to be really aware of how many calories are coming from fat, because that's the one that's easiest to just sneak in and surprise you over and over again. And so you can walk up those calories.
Yeah. Totally. Oh, one of the things a lot of rebel athletes say after tracking for a little bit is, geez, oh my gosh, I didn't know how much fat I was eating. I didn't know how much was getting in here. Or people track like an avocado and they're like, oh my God, it's like 800 calories in an avocado, Aaron. And I'm like, yeah, I know. It's crazy, right?
Math is pretty cool.
9 calories per gram.
And it doesn't lie, which is the nice part about it. It's very objective. It's
helps.
Not opinionated, and it tells you what you may not want to hear, but it tells you the truth. And,
I think I need a T-shirt made that
I'm
says
sure that
science
T-shirt
doesn't care
exists.
about
It has
feelings.
to. Someone has had to have made that T-shirt. I'm going to Google that after this, because it has to be out there.
But whenever I have a moment, I have to remind myself that. I have to remind myself too. Even when you're a scientist, you got to remind yourself of that.
Okay, so for folks, if you're trying to gain weight and you need to make an adjustment, the scale's not moving. Step 1, prioritize what you actually want to do right now. Don't try to lean out and gain weight at the same time. Step 2, actually track and look at your macros. Are the proteins and carbs there? Are you getting in enough proteins and carbs? Or are you getting in way too much fat? Because that's just not going to work for you. Or maybe your total calories are just down and we just need to bump you up, right? Like if proteins are there and carbs are there and fats are there and you're not gaining weight and the workouts are there, we just have to bump up calories, right? Like that's the easiest thing to do. Bump up calories by 100, 200, 300 calories, whatever it is per day, and then see what happens. And then you kind of play that game, but just stair step it up until the scale starts moving again, and then we're on track. And then when the scale stops moving, then we'll bump again, right? It's not exceedingly difficult. I think people sometimes expect there to be some like really elaborate answer to this, but it's really just make a small change, see what happens. If I'm on track, don't touch it. If I'm not on track, let's make another small change. And then that's how we essentially get there over time.
Totally agree. What's simple is not easy. And I would say bringing in the consistency, just as James said, it doesn't sound elaborate, but doing this consistently is elaborate behavior and elaborate mental
behavior is always the
discipline.
complicated part, and just getting people to do this consistently. Yeah, I think people are usually amazed at how simple, air quotes, how simple it is, right? When you look at it on paper, it's like, that's all I have to do? Yes. But then they don't do it. Right. And so that's the thing that's always frustrating. You get the I know from people. Oh, I know. I'm like, okay, let's talk about why aren't you doing it then? Like, don't tell me you know.
Right. I know. I always get nervous when like an old axiom becomes forgotten as to why it's an axiom. So if we say things like, do you sleep? Do you walk? Do you meditate? Do you eat vegetables? And people are like, yeah. But actually,
No.
do you? And a lot of people are.
I mean, they're not.
Maybe not, actually.
Yeah.
In my mind,
Yeah.
I do that.
Drives me insane. Anyways, Erin, this was wonderful. Thank you so much. Folks, people listening, I hope that this was useful. I hope that it was helpful. You can always pop on over to Instagram, DM us, drop us questions. We would love to help out any way we can here. Otherwise, hope that everyone has a fantastic rest of their week. And thank you as always for tuning in.